What's going on, guys? Welcome to the channel, welcome to the video. In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at Ableton's Operator. This is a really cool instrument that comes with Ableton Suite, and you get access to it. It is a really simple synth at first glance, but once you start to dive into it, you realize that it has a ton to offer. They've managed to pack so many features into this tiny little interface that it's honestly pretty insane. So without any further ado, let's get into the video so I can show you 5 ways to make awesome melodies with Operator. Okay, so here we are in Ableton, and as you can see, I've got this MIDI clip loaded up. I made it when I was messing around with Operator before, and I'm gonna pull up Operator. And I've changed my default operator, so it's going to play a sine wave with some glide on it, so it's going to sound pretty cool. So that's what we've got going on here, and let's go ahead and take a look at Operator. And I imagine this video is going to be kind of blurry because the first thing you'll probably notice is Operator is absolutely tiny. So before we get into making melodies with Operator, I want to go over some of the basic features of the synth. And the first thing I want to look at is these oscillators. So we've got 4 oscillators. They're labeled A, B, C, and D. And right now A is the only one playing, and it is playing a sine wave, just a basic shape. Pretty basic sound, just a sine wave, and I've added on some glide. I'll get into that in a second. Well, let's just take a look at this envelope. If you've worked with synthesis before, you know this is pretty standard way of controlling your synths. You have attack, decay, sustain, and release. So if I turn up this attack, we're gonna have the sound fade in. If I turn down the sustain, we're gonna have it fade out at the length of this decay. And if this sustain is up, this release is gonna let it go at the end and have it fade out in a much longer way. So now we have this nice, lush pad sound. I mean, not really, it's just a sine wave, but you get the idea. And each oscillator has their own envelope and wave table that you can select, and you can layer them together in some pretty interesting ways. Let's switch to something a little bit more harmonically rich. I'm gonna go with a saw wave. And we're gonna go into the filter section. So the filter section is also pretty basic. We've got 2 windows. We've got an envelope that will move the filter, and we've got the filter itself, and we've got this nice little interface that matches the EQ in Ableton, where you can move around this filter. 5 different filter types to choose from. I'm just gonna stick with a basic low pass. And then you can move that filter around with this envelope, and this percentage is going to choose how much of this envelope is applied to the filter. So if we have a nice short decay, it's going to punch it at the start. Or we can have it open up. The other things in this filter section are pretty interesting. We have this drive knob, which is going to add some distortion based on the filter model. These are all modeled on analog synths that have, these unique filter sections. You also have this shaper, which is just going to add additional distortion that's not modeled on any filter, just Ableton's own distortion. A dry wet knob for that. You'll notice that in every section you go to, the filter section, the oscillators, there are just a ton of tiny little knobs that do really interesting things. You can really get lost exploring all of the different options within Operator. The last section that I'm going to hit on, because I just want to touch on the basics, is this pitch section. And you can turn on this pitch envelope, make the sound slide down or up at the beginning. And then you've got this spread knob, which is gonna detune the sound and make it really wide, which can be great for adding some width. And then you've also got this glide, which I have turned on because I just think it sounds amazing, and we're getting some nice movement in this melody because of it. But if I turn that off, everything's just gonna hit right on the pitch. And I kind of like having it move up to certain notes. Having that on makes some really nice sounds. So that's pretty much all the basics. With that out of the way, let's get into 5 ways to use Operator to make awesome melodies. So if you're feeling like this might not be for you, it's kind of overwhelming, part of the fun of using Operator or any synthesizer that you're not familiar with is just learning how it works. And one of the best ways to learn how it works is to go through presets, and Ableton does have some presets for Operator. The only drawback, I think, is that these presets sound really bad. Like, most of these are just terrible sounding, and I would never want to use them in my music, but they're a good way to figure out how this synth actually works. So I'm gonna go into this mallet section because I've got this kind of plucky melody. So let's go ahead and grab one of these presets. Yeah, like even none of these are sounding too good to me, but that's all right. Let's just give this a listen. So there you have it. We've got this nice bell sound. You know, obviously it doesn't sound great, but let's just see what this is actually doing. So we've got this sine wave basically with two tiny additional harmonics that have been added in. Everything's running in parallel. So then this looks like the same thing. Coarse pitch is up, and then it's up even higher on here. We have a triangle wave, and then here it's up even higher. Let's hear just that oscillator by itself. Yeah, so already this is a much more interesting sound to me and something that I might almost consider using in a track. And there's another parameter that you can use to add width in Operator besides the spread knob, and that is actually if you go into this sort of master section, among all of these, you know, indecipherable messages that you're getting here, anti-alias, interpol, I don't know, you know, you might not know what those do. You've got this pan, so you can pan it left and right. You've also got this pan according to the key, and so that's going to pan different notes depending on how high or low they are, which can be really interesting. So if I start low on the keyboard, it's going to start on the left. And that's kind of an interesting effect that is used in a lot of piano VSTs, like certain piano emulations will do that because of course the lower notes are actually on the left if you're listening to a piano, and the higher notes are going to play on the right. So if you're making like a keys sound or you just want to add some width, you can turn that up and it'll make things nice and wide and very interesting. And then you've also got this pan random knob, which also can do the same thing, but it's not going to follow, you know, the keys. It's just going to pan everything a little bit randomly. It goes from 0 to 100. So if I put it somewhere in the middle, we're going to hear a nice wide, you know, random panning per note. Of course, if you're using something like FL Studio, you actually have the option to just go into the MIDI roll and add random panning per note, but it's just cool to have a synth that can do that with one knob. So I've mentioned before that you can get this kind of lo-fi effect with the LFOs, and there's a couple other ways to get some similar sort of lo-fi effects in Operator. So I'm gonna stick with the same melody. But I'm going to switch the sound that we've got going on here, and I'm actually going to pull up a different instance of Operator, and we're going to go back to the default, but I'm going to change this to a saw wave and the glide off. Okay, so that's kind of silly. Let's turn up our release and our attack. And now let's turn down the filter, and this is where the sound's really gonna start to sound interesting. And now let's go in and add some spread. Let's go ahead and legato this. We're gonna have some longer chords. Okay, so the first way to add sort of a lo-fi effect is with the LFO, like I mentioned before. We're just gonna make sure that A is selected here, and our amount is gonna go down a little bit so we don't have too much of a pitch bend. Let me immediately we have sort of this unstable character to it. Some other things I can do is go into this filter section and change the frequency based on the velocity, so that when a note is hit harder, the filter is going to be a little bit more open, and when it's softer, it's going to be more closed. And then I'm going to grab a quick MIDI effect so I can randomize the velocity a bit more. So that's pretty cool. We're already getting sort of this warm, kind of wobbly sound. Let's go in and add some randomness with the pan, like I mentioned before. And let's also layer in a second oscillator. I'm going to put that in parallel. That's going to play a slightly different wave table to get us a bigger layered sound. And you can change the fine tune to make it even more detuned. So that sounds really nice. We have this very warm sort of analog lo-fi sound. I might even layer in some white noise on top of that. Let's go in there. I'm gonna turn up the attack and the release so that this is just gonna kind of play in the background. So now I've got that white noise in there, and maybe even one more layer of this sort of sine 8. I'm gonna go ahead and increase the filter drive and the shaper drive to 4-bit, which is gonna add this sort of bit crusher effect on it. I'm gonna turn down the dry and wet on that so it's not so aggressive. Turn up the attack on our main oscillator so that it's a little bit softer. And one thing that is really cool is that you can copy the envelopes to different oscillators. So if I want to take this envelope and make sure it's applied to all of our other oscillators, I can just say copy envelope from oscillator A, and now our attack, sustain, decay, and release are all going to be the same. Now we have this just amazing warm lo-fi sound, and it's just created an operator. And having everything in operator is one thing, but the next tip is going to bring these sounds to a whole new level. So of course in Ableton we aren't limited to operator. Things are going to really start opening up in terms of sound design when we start adding some of Ableton's effects. So let's stick with this nice lo-fi patch that we've got going on here, and let's just add one effect. I'm just going to add reverb, and we're going to hear how great that is going to sound. And we're not even limited to Ableton's effects. Of course, you can go ahead and throw on your favorite VST. If I throw Portal onto this, we could do a whole nother video on Portal. If you haven't seen that, go ahead and check it out. But let's stick with Ableton stock effects for now. We can add on a flanger or a chorus. So I think that sounds pretty amazing, and what I'm actually going to do is go ahead and resample this so that we can start working with it as a melody. So we're not even working with operator anymore, we just have this audio file, and now we can do stuff like really chopping this up and messing with it. So let's go ahead and reverse this. So at this point, I'm pretty much just ready to cook up because this melody is sounding great, but I do want to add an extra layer to it, and I'm going to use operator to do that just to demonstrate the one last tip here. And that is going to be about simplicity, because one thing that operator excels in is working as a basic, simple layer. And that's why I have my default operator set up as a sine wave with some glide, because it just works really well as a layer under almost any melody. So I'm going to try and add a layer with that under this really cool, synth loop that we've got going on here, and just see what I can come up with. Let's add some of that pan random, get some motion going on here. Nice, I think that sounds pretty cool. Let's add on a filter. And let's add on a little bit of movement with the LFO. Alright, this is sounding really good, so I'm gonna go ahead and finish out arranging this beat, and I will play it for you guys in a second. I really hope you enjoyed this video and learning about Operator. If you have Ableton, I hope that you go ahead and make some cool patches with Operator, and you can save a grouped effect of Operator and a bunch of audio effects, so that can be a really great way to create some unique sounds that nobody else is gonna have. So yeah, I really hope you enjoyed, and I hope to see you in the next one. Kill 'em!